The story opens with two seasoned detectives, Mason Danvers and Joel Gaynor, on a high-stakes mission to apprehend notorious drug lord Victor Abbott and his brother, Griffin. As the ambush begins, Griffin, armed and ready, strikes first, critically wounding Joel and forcing him to fall back. With the situation quickly spiraling out of control, Mason springs into action, launching a fierce assault that erupts into a brutal firefight. After managing to bring Griffin down, Mason wastes no time. He sets his sights on Victor, the mastermind pulling the strings behind this deadly criminal empire. A fierce and inevitable shootout broke out, raging on until both sides ran out of ammunition. Left with no other option, they charged at each other, plunging into a brutal hand-to-hand fight. Victor fought with everything he had, determined to bring Mason down, and was moments away from delivering the final blow. But just in time, Joel and the police force arrived, swiftly subduing and arresting both Victor and Griffin. As Victor was being led away in handcuffs, he turned to Mason with a chilling promise.
"I'll be seeing you real soon."
After the ordeal, Mason returned home and shared a quiet moment with his wife, Jocelyn, discussing her pregnancy. He remained a constant source of support, urging her to prioritize her health and well-being. But back at the precinct, the calm quickly shattered. A colleague approached him with disturbing news. Every witness to the Abbott brothers' arrest had vanished without a trace under strange and troubling circumstances. A growing sense of unease gnawed at Mason deep down. He knew this wasn't the end. To make matters worse, with no remaining witnesses and insufficient evidence, the police had no choice but to release Victor and Griffin Abbott. As the release became imminent, Mason hastily called his wife, his voice laced with urgency and fear. He couldn't shake Victor's chilling parting words, "We'll see each other again soon." And now, it seemed that moment had come. To Mason's horror, it wasn't Jocelyn who picked up the phone. It was Victor. He had broken into their home and taken her hostage. Heart-pounding, Mason raced back, calling Joel on the way to request urgent backup. But it was too late. In a brutal act of cruelty, Victor had murdered Jocelyn without hesitation. When Mason arrived, he found her lifeless body and Victor standing over her, eyes burning with defiance. Consumed by grief and fury, Mason raised his gun, finger tightening on the trigger, ready to end it all. But before Mason could pull the trigger, Joel intervened, pleading with him to stand down. After a tense moment, Mason finally lowered his weapon, abandoning the idea of killing Victor. The police moved in, arresting Victor and sending him to prison. But the damage was already done. Jocelyn's death had shattered Mason's world. The purpose that once drove him the dream of becoming a detective to protect the city meant nothing now. All that remained was a single, consuming desire: revenge. And one night, in the quiet shadows of his home, Mason began preparing his weapons. Driven by the need to avenge his wife's death, Mason set out to find Griffin, Victor's older brother. After uncovering the location of Griffin's hideout, he contacted Joel and called in for police backup. But he didn't wait. Wasting no time, Mason infiltrated the hideout and launched a surprise attack. With unwavering resolve, he pulled the trigger, killing Griffin moments before Joel and the police burst in. Mason was arrested on the spot for premeditated murder. But it wasn't a misstep. This was exactly how he had planned it all along. In an attempt to show goodwill, the warden assigned Mason a lighter job in the laundry room. But Mason remained stoic, offering no reaction, neither interest nor concern. Meanwhile, Victor soon discovered that Mason had entered the prison. Though his former hideout had been destroyed, it didn't faze him in the least. The following day, while Mason worked in the laundry room, a group of inmates suddenly surrounded him. Despite his formidable combat skills, Mason was quickly overpowered by their numbers. The blows came at him relentlessly, knocking him to the ground. Just as things seemed hopeless, a guard stormed in, forcing the inmates to back off. Thanks to the timely intervention, Mason narrowly avoided further harm. A few days later, while stepping outside for some fresh air, Mason struck up a conversation with a guard. In an unintentional slip, he uncovered a disturbing truth. Despite only being in prison for a year, Victor had already established a vast and powerful network. Victor controlled the smuggling operations within the prison and had established powerful connections with the outside world. Mason quickly realized that Victor wasn't just another inmate, he was still manipulating things from the shadows. But Mason's focus remained unwavering. He didn't care about the consequences, even if it meant sacrificing his own life. He was determined to avenge his wife. One night, he quietly retrieved a pen from beneath his bed and meticulously sharpened the tip, crafting it into a makeshift dagger. As the prison plunged into darkness, Mason quietly slipped into the bathroom, lying in wait to ambush one of the men who had attacked him in the laundry room. The fight that followed was vicious. Though Mason had dealt a severe blow to his opponent, he still struggled to gain the upper hand. The sharp pen pressed closer to his throat, mere inches away from ending his life. But just as death seemed inevitable, the inmate, weakened from blood loss, gasped for breath and collapsed to the ground. Mason had narrowly escaped death, but his resolve only grew stronger. After eliminating his first target, he quickly shifted his focus to another inmate. As the man cleaned, Mason struck without hesitation. With no allies to come to his aid, the victim stood no chance. In the end, he crumpled to the ground, a bloodied broom handle, the only testament to the brutal confrontation. When Victor realized his men were being picked off one by one, he knew he could no longer remain on the sidelines. Determined to stop Mason's rampage, Victor immediately sent his most elite enforcers to ambush the relentless threat. But Mason, driven by fury, was unstoppable. Just as he was about to take down his next target, a prison guard suddenly intervened, striking Mason and forcing him to the ground. He was swiftly subdued and escorted to the warden's office. His momentum finally halted. Instead of punishing him, the warden made a proposal. If Mason agreed to become his enforcer, eliminating those deemed undesirable, he would overlook all of Mason's actions in prison. The warden cared little for the blood spilled, as long as those who needed to vanish stayed gone. In that moment, Mason realized that Victor's influence in the prison was probably the result of a secret deal with the warden. As a former cop, he couldn't bring himself to accept such corruption. Without a word, Mason turned and walked away, rejecting the warden's offer. His defiance ignited the warden's fury, and as punishment, he ordered Mason thrown into solitary confinement. After his release, Mason made his way silently to the laundry room. When no one was watching, he quickly pried a piece of metal from the heating pipe above and concealed it in his clothing, silently preparing for what came next. That night, he meticulously sharpened the metal, shaping it into a lethal brass knuckle. But Mason didn't stop there. One by one, Victor's men disappeared without a sound as his relentless assault continued. When Victor learned that his men were still being eliminated, his patience finally snapped and his rage reached a boiling point. As Mason went to collect his food, Victor quietly drew a knife and moved in on him. But Mason sensed the threat instantly. Before Victor could strike, he launched a powerful punch at a nearby guard, throwing everything into chaos. Mason was quickly restrained, but he had successfully evaded Victor's attack. Nevertheless, he was thrown back into solitary confinement. Upon his release, Mason made a firm decision. He would eliminate the last of Victor's men before confronting him directly. The conflict escalated as more and more people joined the fight, but rather than weakening, Mason grew even stronger, systematically taking down every obstacle that stood in his way. When his attackers charged at him with gleaming knives, Mason showed no fear, steadily countering each strike with precision. Armed only with a rope, he took down his final opponent, hurling him off the rooftop. As the last of the guards fell, the prisoners quickly seized their weapons, sparking a full-scale riot. Gunshots rang out, and fights erupted in every corner of the prison. The entire facility descended into chaos as guards and inmates clashed in a brutal, unrelenting battle. Victor grabbed a gun from one of his men and fired relentlessly at Mason, but each bullet struck a different prisoner instead. As Mason closed in, the two collided in a brutal hand-to-hand battle. With his fists clenched, Mason poured all his fury into every punch. But the size disparity was overwhelming. Despite his full force, Mason's strikes barely made an impact on Victor. Victor's sledgehammer-like punches left Mason reeling, his vision blurred as he struggled to regain his balance. But even through the haze, Mason spotted an opening. With a surge of determination, he launched a decisive strike, bringing Victor to the ground. Just as Mason was about to exact his revenge, the warden abruptly intervened, shattering the moment. He couldn't let Mason take control of the prison, but eliminating a former cop like him would be too risky to cover up. Without a word, the warden silently passed Victor a gun, betting everything on him as his final pawn, hoping Victor would finish Mason off for him. But in that tense moment, Mason locked eyes with Victor and revealed the truth. The warden had been the one to betray him, leaking the locations of his men. Fury ignited within Victor. Without a second thought, he delivered a vicious kick, shattering the warden's leg before turning back to continue his brutal fight with Mason. Overpowered by Victor's immense strength, Mason felt himself weakening, his resistance slipping away. But just when it seemed like all hope was lost, Victor unexpectedly hesitated. Seizing the opportunity, Mason quickly drew the concealed weapon he had hidden earlier and struck with deadly precision, ending Victor's life in an instant. With that final blow, Mason exacted his long-awaited vengeance for his wife and their unborn child. The lesson of this film is clear: hatred and revenge bring no true resolution. Rather than offering satisfaction, they only lead to suffering, not just for the one targeted, but for the seeker of vengeance as well.